We've been discussing extensively the tragic attack on a Catholic church in Minneapolis during a service to mark the first week of school. As with so many of the other mass shootings in recent years, legacy media has been burying a key element of the story. That many of these shooters had mental health issues, including gender confusion. Well, the Trump administration says it plans to address the root causes of violence.
This happens too much in our country. And if you look, we really do have, I think, a mental health crisis in the United States of America. We take way more psychiatric medication than any other nation on earth. And I think it's time for us to start asking some very hard questions about the root causes of this violence.
That was Vice President J.D. Vance yesterday. Also yesterday, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said his department is launching studies on how psychiatric drugs might be contributing to violence. Are these all steps in the right direction? Well, joining me to discuss this now is Sheila Matthews, the co-founder of AbleChild.org. Sheila, welcome to Washington Watch.
Thank you so much, Casey, for having AbleChild on. We really appreciate it.
Well, it's an honor to have you. I think people are fascinated by this topic right now. It comes up cyclically, and I think we've got to start digging into the root issues to try to get to the bottom of this. In that spirit, what can you tell us about the mental health issues surrounding some of these school shooters? I mean, I don't want to make too much of it, but it does seem many of the violent shooters have identified as transgender or gender fluid as part of their identity.
Well, we have a long history at AbleChild investigating, unfortunately, these mass killings. And we started with Sandy Hook. Now, Adam Lanza was not a transgender, but what he was a mental health patient that was seeking mental health treatment. And he was on a cocktail of psychiatric drugs that have never been tested together, like the makers of makers of one psychiatric drug and another psychiatric drug do not cross-test these drugs. So the mass killings that we've worked on throughout the country have been associated with psychiatric drugs. Now, the trending issue of these young men that have been lied to and told that they can somehow be a woman or vice versa is, again, under the umbrella of psychiatry. So they're in charge, really, of the policies throughout the country, the mental health providers. In each state, there's committees that make these decisions. And so they're supporting this lie to our children that they can become a different sex. So that really falls under the umbrella of mental health. So the introduction of these gender affirming drugs are a combination, what we're finding, like with Audrey Hale in Tennessee, is that she was on a combination of psychiatric drugs that were first started, and then the gender drugs of the hormones. So the combination has never been tested. So this is human research. That's what this is.
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing, what you're telling me is we're seeing living experiments of combining these cocktails of drugs. And I really feel a lot of compassion for people who need either, feel they need the transgender treatment, as it's called, or the SSRIs and related medication. People don't get to that point without being in a lot of pain on either issue. At the same time, the transgender science is very new and in some cases non-existent, or there's evidence that the treatments, quote unquote treatments that we're using don't really help people. And then I think even the SSRIs and other psychiatric medications, they have a lot of side effects often. And we don't have, 100-year studies on how some of these things affect people. So am I mischaracterizing this, or do you think, what's the answer? Do we just need to study how these work together? Do we even have any research on that at all?
No, there is no science behind psychiatric diagnosing. So ADHD and bipolar, this was voted in by psychiatry. There's no blood test, there's no brain scan, there's no way to determine whether a child has ADHD or bipolar. It's a marketing effort, a combination between the psychiatric and pharmaceutical companies. So right from the beginning, we're talking, what is the science? These are symptoms. And I agree with you. I have a great deal of sympathy for children that are suffering from attention issues or sexual issues. We're talking about puberty. And, all human beings go through a transition of puberty and trying to figure out your own identity as a person. But what the psychiatric industry has done is marketed this to become sellable to parents. And this is the science that really needs to be questioned. So there's no way to determine whether this medical model we've been using for 30 years of diagnosing with these false labels and then drugging our children has helped them in any way. So the model itself is very flawed, and the industry has pushed out anybody in their own industry that has disagreed with this medical model that has been tied to the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to what you're saying there. And to me, what it comes down to, as you pointed, there's no blood test for a lot of these. So it's based on the judgment of a doctor who's evaluating. And of course, there's schooling and education. But when the entire community, the medical community in that field, has departed from a basic understanding of human nature, I think they can get into trouble and say, what do I mean by that? Well, if you don't know the difference between the two genders, or that there are only two, maybe you don't understand human nature well enough to prescribe. Or if you don't know that, hey, little boys are just not going to want to sit still and you need to drug them. I mean, I think what it keeps coming back to here is a misunderstanding of human nature, because we've adopted a lot of modern psychiatric theories. Final word here, Sheila.
Well, the industry itself is totally unregulated. They're writing their own legislation. Parent advocates like AbleChild, human rights organizations are not allowed into at the table. President Trump said that parents would have a seat at the table. We want that seat. We want human rights in mental health. We want informed consent. We want parents to be told that there is no more than two genders. You cannot convert your child from a boy to a girl or a girl to a boy. That science isn't there. It's insulting. It's a human rights violation. And the actual psychiatric diagnosing of children in schools, it is $1 billion business, and we need a voice at the table. So we're grateful for Secretary Kennedy that he has now launched this investigation into SSRIs and mass killings. We've been asking for that. We have a petition on our website that people can sign. I really urge your listeners to do that because we need 10,000 signatures to present to the president, and we have about 3,500 right now. We don't have the same platform as the pharmaceutical industries do. What we want is informed consent. We want you to be able to choose your own type of mental health, but we want real science and real informed consent.
Well, Sheila Matthews, I appreciate you coming on, making a lot of great points. Kind of a dark picture, but sadly, I think there's a lot of truth in it. Co-founder of AbleChild.org. Sheila, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having us.